process, and you've been within for about a year and a half, haven't you? Liberate Tate, I'm sure many of you will have heard of them. Internationally renowned, amazing the amount of traction and popular press and mainstream attention that your work's had compared to the range of practitioners who are operating with similar tactics, but you've managed to gain the kind of be part of the popular discussion. I think that's really fantastic. So their remit is they're dedicated to making creatively disobedient work at or about Tate institutions till it drops oil funding. In a sense, I don't need to rehearse this because you'll be telling us this. But I do want to say that they've also released a publication, not if, but when. I like that. Culture Beyond Oil. So it was founded in 2010. So this is a long-term iterative project, which is really interesting in terms of how practices might develop. And of course, why we invited them. I suppose it was really interesting to us that art institutions themselves are one scale at which activism might be targeted, talking about this understanding how to hold people to account across different scales, perhaps. And of course, it's about this idea of how we can make these issues around climate change visible, discussable, performable. I liked Derek's word, palpable. So I'm just going to hand over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Monica and Lucy and everyone. We're really, really happy to be here as part of this conversation today. There's loads of things about the way that you've put together this symposium that is a really kind of rich dialogue for us to have around our work and what we're trying to do. So we're just really glad to have been invited to be part of this conversation and really keen to hear from everybody in the room about the direction that we're heading. We're part of Liberate Tate, which is an art collective of between 5 and 500 people. And we make unsanctioned live art in Tate gallery spaces to free Tate from BP. So we're never invited, we're never commissioned, we're certainly never paid. We're usually restricted or ejected in some way. And we make our work as intervention to open up a space of dissent and change within the institution. And I'm Mel Evans. Hello.
I'm Eleanor Polisano. Hi. So today we thought we'd give a sort of up-to-date exploration of 3 of our performances to really explore sort of our take on what visualising the Anthropocene might mean to us from our perspective of being an art collective, and really to sort of couch that at the outset as being this is about ending the age of oil, and this is about breaking this institutional, some 25-year-old partnership between BP and Tate.
So for us, when we think about the Anthropocene, the kind of immediate thing is that climate change, that the start of that process, whether you're talking about that as the start from colonialism or the start from the Industrial Revolution, the result of both those things is what we see now in terms of the current impacts of climate change on people who have, around the world, who have historically endured the worst of colonialism and the Industrial Revolution to start with. So when we think about this era and how it might end, that is for us about this question of, visualizing the end of the oil age. And in part, that's what our work is doing. This is an image of a performance we made in 2011 to mark the first anniversary of the start of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, and it's been shared tens of thousands of times online as an image which kind of sums up the pain and the trauma of the fossil fuel industry, of the oil industry specifically. And we make this work inside Tate spaces to separate Tate from BP, but also to open up that wider question around why oil companies sponsor the arts, what's in it for them. And we know that oil companies do this because they write about it themselves in their PR analysis. It's because they're trying to get for themselves a kind of guise of social acceptability, what in the industry they'd call a social license to operate. So the idea that, okay, we're doing all this bad stuff over here, but you'll keep us in your hearts and your homes. You won't reject us from your culture. And what we're saying, a lot of people, as we know, is saying right now is actually maybe these practices don't have a place in our cultures.
There's a sense that if you're an oil company and if you can get away with this sort of sponsorship, then it's PR gold, basically, because if we take Tate, cultural leading institution, and what an opportunity for an oil company to sort of embed itself, to sustain those arguments that not only are none of us can live without them, but they're normal, they're integral, they're necessary. So there's in a way there's a very sort of helpful public debate around the arts and funding for companies like BP that act as parasites on that, which says we're saving the arts. We protect free access to art, but the truth is, and especially of the BP deal, that the money that BP give to Tate it's peanuts. It accounts for 0.1% of the annual spending.
0.5, yeah, less than 0.5% of everything that Tate is spending per year. So it's tiny, tiny amount, and yet, if you go down the road to Tate Britain, the BP logo, as you know, is plastered on the walls and the flags and the paper and everything. So they're getting all this exposure and they're imprinting the idea in people's minds that they are enabling free access to art, which isn't what's happening at all. It's, as I'm sure people here will know, it's an agreement between the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, who offer Tate between 30 to 40% of its annual spending, depending on the budget that year, that they will offer free public access to art. It has nothing to do with BP, and it has much more to do with these old relationships. So the people you're looking at on these banknotes that we made for one of our performances are John Brown, who is Tate chair of the Board of Trustees, who was BP CEO from 1998 to 2007, who worked for BP since he was 18 years old, having followed his father's footsteps into the company. So somebody who probably, it's just a guess, but probably wants BP to stay as a sponsor and who must intimidate and stifle any staff, of which we know there are many, who want to raise the issue and discuss the issue of whether or not BP should stay. And then Nicholas Sirota, who is, as many people will know, the director of Tate, who is in this sticky position, who's been director of Tate since 88. And yeah, they've both been around for quite some time.
Yeah. And so this sort of these banknotes that we should have brought some along, that symbolise so much about the tensions in this relationship. So this sort of old boys club, this really very small monetary contributions, but this fact of this ongoing sponsorship when just Deepwater Horizon, the biggest accidental oil spill in history, happened just in 2010. So it's just quite staggering, and that's the sort of space that we're operating in.
So we'd like to start by talking to you about a performance we made in June of last year called Timepiece.
Yeah, so Timepiece was a durational protest performance that we started at high tide one Saturday in June in Tate Modern, in the big turbine hall with that sort of shiny concrete slanting floor. And it was an exploration of many different types of time that we'll talk about. And the performance went on for 26 hours. So I think possibly we are some of the few people that have spent the night in the turbine hall on the banks of the River Thames.
And since we're talking about time and concepts of time and Anthropocene, we're going to actually start with a time lapse of this performance, just for you to get a flavour of what those... I guess the sound's on. So this is those 26 hours compressed into 1 minute 45 seconds. So watch closely. I will full screen just as soon as I can.
So just to describe a little bit about what you were seeing before we automatically play on. So the...
Is it worth reminding the audience that you would like them to kind of comment on some of the pieces?
Yeah, well, I mean, we might come... Yeah.
So just to explain a little bit more about what timepiece is. So in the months leading up to the performance, we amassed a bibliography of lots of different texts, whether they be about art or activism or climate change or the oil industry, and laid them out, which you might have seen in a row at the bottom of the slope, and invited performers to individually come up, take a text, take a bit of charcoal, and spend some time, knowing how much time we had, of picking out key extracts. And we started at the bottom of the slope, and we went all the way up to the doors, and we also set out a camp. So this is very much about sustenance, and you might have seen that sort of wheel shape of sleeping bags on the flat bit of the turbine hoil, and that sort of reflection of the BP Helix logo. We stayed overnight, and you saw, and these are bits we'll talk about, how the performance was washed away by the cleaning staff, and how the performance continued through the night, and how the gallery was closed off partly to the public.
So firstly, the different kind of parts of time that we were exploring with this. So in a sense, there's kind of geological time, because we're talking about oil, and by talking about oil, we're sort of kind of being present with this plankton that's composted down at the bottom of the sea millions of years ago. We're bringing that into kind of conversation with this idea of the Anthropocene and the idea of a change in era of time taking place, these different kind of geological eras coming into conversation. And with that, the question of climate change and what the burning of this thousands-year-old plankton might do to the planet, might change in terms of what era we then enter. And then we do that with this exploration of our own time. So the time that all these people, over 100 people spent in the gallery, the hundreds more people who were visiting that gallery that day and stumbled across it and stayed to interact with this very porous participatory performance. the millions and millions of people online who were sharing and talking about the performance as it took place. It was very, very kind of, it was trending on Twitter, I think is the only way to phrase that. It was very alive online. All these different things coming together, and then right up to the front of, well, when will Tate drop BP? When will that time period end of its relationship with this company? And the sort of rawness of, when will they close the toilets? Because we knew that at some point they would close the gallery and we would no longer have access to the toilets. And what would that mean in terms of the duration of our performance? So all these different elements of time. One of the things that we wanted to mention with this is that, has anybody read a piece that was published in Nature almost this time last year, maybe around April last year, Nature, the science magazine, by a scientist called Simon Lewis? Is that something that's been on any? I wasn't sure if it might have been on. It was quite a big deal when it was published. There was a lot of press around it because Simon and his colleague were making this, raising this question of, when does the Anthropocene begin? Does it begin with the Industrial Revolution, as some people say, or does it begin with colonialism? And the ways in which they were reading it as the start of colonialism, and talking about the Anthropocene with some kind of critical race thinking around that process and what that era means and how it begins. And Simon was one of the performers who took part in this performance, and the paper in Nature was one of the texts that was being inscribed on the floor of Tate. Simon's someone who I've known for a long time through being part of different grassroots activist activities around climate change and the oil industry, including Climate Camp, which was this series of camps that were held, action camps that were held at sites of fossil fuel kind of combustion or destruction or so on. So at Heathrow in 2007 there was a big camp, and at Kings North Power Station in 2008 there was a big camp. He's also someone who was involved in the Reclaim the Streets movement, so the different things that happened throughout the 90s that now at this point in time are looked back on as being responsible for stemming a whole raft of Thatcherite road plans that were being pushed through at that point in the 90s. So I mention these things because there is a trajectory, there is a history that goes into this performance as well around holding space and holding sites of dissent and protest, and also just the practical element of self-sustainability that was necessary to this. So what we were told as we were there through the day, as we saw the police arrive and we saw them go into meetings in the back rooms of the turbine hall, and we had, the head of this, the head of that coming down to talk to us from Tate. And the head of health and safety is a very nice guy called Dennis, who, to be honest, we've gotten to know quite well over the years. Is quite familiar with who we are. And, he was saying, look, when it gets to 10 o'clock, the gallery will close and we'll ask you to leave. And if you don't leave, we will ask the police to step in. And that's as far as he'd kind of go. We'll ask the police to step in. And we were ready for that. That's our bread and butter. We know what that means. And we were okay with that. And the people who were participating in the performance were resolved to stay no matter what the gallery or the police chose to do. But what they thought is that, well, when we close the toilets, they'll have to leave because they wouldn't be able to stay anyway. And so we only brought out, you see this black structure on the bottom left. We only revealed that at about 11:30 at night when they'd finally got to the point of shutting off the access to the toilets. And this was kind of our trump card. It was like, you thought we weren't ready. You thought we were, kind of like, we're artists and we're writing, we've got our charcoal, but we've got our practical skills too, okay? And set up a compost loo right there in the Tate Turbine Hall. It was used, and that's in a way what enabled us to stay over, because when it came down to it, Tate didn't want to have the police haul us out. That wasn't the image that they wanted to see as part of our performance. We were open to it as a visualization of what this performance was about, but that's not how it played out.
There's this sort of tension between transgression and assimilation that we play with a lot when we do these unsanctioned performances. So we play with it because we start these performances when the gallery is open to the public and invite participation. So you saw the interpretation panel from Timepiece that we put out. I think it's there actually, just it's probably just being stored there. But actually when we had when we're interacting with, we talk, we have these veils on, but we talk to anyone who comes up to us, we explain what we're doing, sometimes we invite, participation, but also, of course, we're also playing with transgression, and that was another theme for this performance, especially around the gallery's opening hours, and sort of putting pressure on them. How far will they play it cool with us? Will they allow this performance to go on? So that became this sort of game of sort of, who's gonna, who's bluffing, who's not bluffing. And it was interesting to have planned this performance and felt that there would be this climax come the closing time. This is the first time we'd stayed beyond closing hours. But actually to find this sort of huge cavernous space, which is so loud and energetic and busy in the day, just sort of almost step back from us, and the lights to go down, and for us to be able to stay overnight, and to have this question of, we've told them that the performance is going to end at 2 p.m. the next day. What will they do? What will they do about the people who have heard about our performance? They're coming to give us coffees and bananas, trying to sort of lob them through the doors. So it was a really sort of playful but sort of transgressive part of the performance, which, is part of what we do. We have to be open to whatever outcomes and responses that we take on when we pledge and we say, and we answer the questions that they ask us always at the outset of every performance, especially now, is, so when are you leaving? Because obviously we have stayed overnight before.
Yeah. And we'll just briefly touch on the bibliography. You've had a chance to kind of read it and spot some of the things in there. But these are the voices that were present in the space over this time. We were tweeting out their quotes and getting responses from some of the writers on here. There's, fiction, non-fiction, theory, oil, art, climate change, dystopia, utopia. There's lots of different kind of themes that all felt very relevant to our questions of being true to the different times that were all kind of present in that space, in that moment, whether lunar or tidal or Anthropocene, whichever. So just to give you a moment to see that. And yeah, I guess the sort of that moment, that question of how does Tate react to us, really is our way of sort of exercising how they react to BP. So, and how as a culture as a whole we respond to climate change. So it's this, things might not stay as they were. It's this kind of, we can't just go about business as usual. And so Tate has kind of been in this sort of comfortable position of, well, but of course we would have BP. But then there was a time when, of course, they would have a tobacco sponsor. And that time ended. This is the sort of change that's happening. And when we pose that decision dilemma to Tate, what will you do with us? We're still here. It's also asking them, what will you do with BP? When will you make that move? And asking more broadly as a culture, okay, climate change is happening. How will we respond? How will we act? So I'm just going to talk very, very briefly about a performance from 2013 called Parts Per Million, partly to situate ourselves in Tate Britain now, so a bit closer to where we're sitting today, to the BP Walk Through British Art. So this is a performance that we made during the kind of opening events of the rehang and the new title BP Walk Through British Art. So It's a gallery within Tate Britain. People may have been there. It's chronologically organised, and the title of it really positions BP as sponsor in much more of a kind of guide or even curatorial position over the artworks on display. This gallery that you see here, this room within the whole course of this exhibition, is the 1840 gallery. And we started our performance there because that's the start of the Industrial Revolution. And the performance involved us counting the increase in carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere for each decade of each gallery. So if we're in the 1890 gallery, we counted from 294 to 299. When we were in the 1960 gallery, the leap was sharper, 318 to 325. So it's 50 performers all wearing veils as a kind of unified group, counting in unison that increase. And I think one of the things it brings to this conversation is, visualizing the Anthropocene isn't only an image-led process, it's also about embodying. And a huge part of our creative process as a collective is around, well, how do we embody our response? And how do we embody what's going on in some way, rather than leaving this kind of cold, sort of hard to grasp, intangential data that sort of we hear about on the news over there? How do we register that within ourselves? And performers came out of this piece quite, emotionally moved by that process, going through that process of counting that rise as it went up, as each decade went on, and we got to the year 2000 gallery. And in the news the week before, there had been the result that we had hit 400 just once, not on an average for a whole year by that point, but in 1 month we had hit 400 parts per million, which is the kind of unsafe level. The safe level is back at 350 parts per million. I just wanted to briefly mention that, partly as some context to our performance from last year.
Yeah, so that really nicely introduces how we escalated our performances to Birthmark, which is a performance where members of Liberate Tate tattooed each other the parts per million of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere in the year of the receiver's birth. So Mel and I were both born in 1983, so we're both tattooed with 343 parts per million. My dad was born in 1951, and I tattooed him with 311 parts per million. And we did this performance on the opening weekend of the Paris Climate Talks. So when we talk about embodying the changes to our climate, grappling with these sort of distant intellectual ideas about, say, the Anthropocene, or how international climate negotiations, what does that mean? How does that deem progress? How can we embody our objection to an oil company like BP being welcomed under the wing of one of the most popular art galleries in the country? So I think we're going to show a video of the performance first.
And actually at the same time as that, what I'll do is hand out some of the exhibition guides that were available to visitors on that day, so that you can get a look at those as well.
How are you feeling?
Pretty excited.
Are you?
I love this stuff.
Do you?
How many tats have you got already?
3.
Any of them to do with climate change?
The one that Mel practiced on my leg.
Okay. Ready?
Ready?
If you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just let me know if anything changes and how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We are having tattooed on our skin the number representing the parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in the year we were born, and we're doing it in the Tate, which has got its own scars in its sponsorship deal with BP. It's quite an emotional experience doing it in front of a whole audience at the start of the day before anyone else has done it, and kind of knowing the person doing it to you as well. The year I was born was 1988, and so 351 was how much parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere then. I chose it here because I wanted it to be visible to me and to other people. It matters to me that tattoos that I have are not hidden.
The year 1840 was chosen because that marks the start of the Industrial Revolution, the start of the point when we started pumping huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. The marks that we have on our body show the rise in the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. It's the first tattoo I've ever had, so it was quite a scary experience. It was a really emotional experience actually. The tattoo giver began by asking me about my own journey involved in social activism and taking action on climate change. So for me it was a real moment to reflect on the journey that I've gone on over 10 years taking action on climate change. And both, there's lots of fear there, but there's lots of hope there as well. We can resist this and we can change things and we can write a new future for